Phil, real pleasure to have you on the show, man. I think there's so many different areas and grounds to cover today. I think maybe a natural place to start, we are talking about right before we start recording, is sports, right? So, just curious as to how did you develop interest into the athletic world?
Hey, so thank you for having me. First of all, really excited to be here. Yeah, sports. I really started a lot of sports when I was younger. My parents put me into just about everything. But when I found basketball, I was kind of like, this is it. This is all. I dropped everything else. So I'd play basketball, and then I think I snowboarded in the winters, and that was about it. So naturally, when my the sort of career got derailed through injuries, I was like, okay, but who are these cool people who kind of like help me rehab all the time? I want to learn more about that. And so my academic career went towards exercise and sports science. I got really interested in that, and then I wanted to help other athletes to, go past the places where I had been stopped in my career and be able to have long, fulfilling careers. And so that's kind of what I did for almost all my 20s, really. I went to Concordia University, and then I went to the U.S. and worked at the University of North Carolina. Did my master's there. Had a short stint in the NFL as well, and then worked for the Chinese Olympic Committee in China, mainly with their weightlifting teams. So yeah, it was really a passion. I'm like a passion driven person, and so yeah, that's what I did with my 20s.
Yeah, when you say, yeah, it's like an interesting, yeah, like completely like left turn, right, in terms of your career.
Mhm.
Just to go back to the sports world for a second. So like, I think just crazy accomplishments, like Philadelphia Eagles, like you said,
Mhm.
the Chinese weightlifting.
Mhm.
What's your specialty? What are you good at in terms of sports?
Oh, like in terms of like me playing, it's still basketball. I still play basketball all the time. Like most of my friends group is made through like being on basketball teams, and like that's still what I do. Yeah.
Yeah. Any lessons from your time? Like I know like it's gonna be the kind of the cliche, like like sports, like internally we always say the joke of like those kind of like very cheesy sports quotes of like
Mhm.
like when the Wayne Gretzky one is like skate where the puck is going, no not where it is, right? All these like cliche sports quotes, but more pratico pratique. Like any lessons now that you're in venture capital, you're more on the business side that you have taken away from the sports world.
100%. So I think one of the biggest ones is around team dynamics. So it's not just one takeaway, but multiple takeaways. So when I worked for the University of North Carolina football team, there was about like 150 staff for about a team of 130 football players. So just to give you an idea of like the extent like to which they were supported. And so um, if something happened, we had to communicate across, academics, sports medicine, the coaching staff, like everything had to be in line. Communication had to be really, really good. And there's just so much that I learned from that because you don't operate in a silo. There's just like in a business where one thing you do here has effects along other divisions of the business. It's very similar in sports to where if one thing happens in the heat of the moment, you have to be able to communicate and keep everybody on the same page so that things can keep on rolling. So I think that like for me personally, in terms of like just growth and being able to operate, like I think that the communication aspect is what comes to top of mind. Um, and then I think like the business of sports, right? Like I got a good look at the business of sports from the NFL side, and it's like it's not personal, even like it's business, and so being able to build real relationships, even though that might end just for business purposes, like the next day or the next hour, right? Like you build a relationship with a player and they disappear the next day, they get cut. You know, even though you've been working with them for 2 months, and it's kind of the same in the business world, right? Where things can happen. It's not personal, and it's still okay to build connections with people. You don't want to have a layer of separation just because that person may not continue with the company or on the team. So being able to manage that sort of, I guess, emotionally, and being able to just navigate that and still show up fully and be present and connect with people.
Yeah, I think it's very apropos your comment about team, right? I think it was that like it's been maybe a few weeks or months now, like the that internal memo from Shopify where Toby spoke about how like Shopify is a team, it's not a family, and it's like you said, sometimes people get cut, or they get promoted because of
Mhm.
performance. So it's like I find there is some pretty good analogies there. How did you then decide to switch careers? Was that a difficult decision, something that you always wanted to do, or like just curious to hear you about your thought process?
Yeah, I'd always been very intrigued by company building. Like I didn't understand it. I was like, okay, well, I understand how someone could have the expertise to build a product, right, to build an app or something, but how do you make that into a company? And so I'd always just been very curious, but I was in a box. I wasn't like I'm the sports dude, you know. I didn't let myself expand from that box. And when I was in China, it was really a moment of deep reflection for the year I was there. And I'd always been interested in tech, and so I was just kind of like, well, what if I were to switch careers now? I knew it was going to happen at some point. I knew that this was a career I'd have when I was younger, but you know, what about my future? And so I started trying to find places to position myself in the tech space. And without a background, you know, in tech or in finance, it was kind of like I'm not sure where I'd fit. But then I came across venture capital. Like I didn't know what it was until maybe two or 3 years ago. And I was like, wait, there are people who sit around and you know make decisions about where the future of the planet goes, because that's really what it is, right? All these big companies that now control the planet were funded through venture capital, and so I'm just kind of like, that would be an interesting position to be in if you know you have a mindset like me of empowering you know the Black community, because I think that perspective is missing from the sort of venture capital space. And I was like, you know what, I want to do that. So I quit my job from one day to the next. It was literally like, all right, I'm out. So I quit, bought a one way ticket to Thailand, went, you know, did some Muay Thai training, traveled Asia a bit, you know, and then I was like, all right, I'm going home. I'm going to be a VC. I'd never met it. I had never met a VC. I knew nobody in tech. And so I came back on this sort of leap of faith. And, you know, a month or two later, the pandemic hits kind of thing. And it was very interesting to try to you know recreate myself in that time, and find opportunities, you know, to sort of network and be in the space.
We're gonna have to go back to Muay Thai, but we're gonna come back to that later because I feel like it's something I like doing from time to time. But I find it's a fascinating story, right? So you said you listen, like you had the idea, and then you had the chutzpah to quit and say, "Hey, listen, this is what I want to do."
Mhm.
Um, you mentioned wanting to help and promote Black people. So curious as to like that issue. Why is it near and dear to your heart? Is it a cause that you know you've always fought for? So curious. Obviously, you're of Haitian origin. So curious to hear you feel a little bit on it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm my dad's Haitian. I was raised as a Black Haitian man. My mother's white, and so I've always had this sort of in between perspective where I sort of see the world through two different lenses. I have a whole side of my family that's white, a whole side of my family that's Black, and you know, just being you know raised by a Haitian father who's very proud and very much an activist, right? So that's kind of ingrained in me a little bit. Um, where I got the idea specifically for venture capital is funny. So I was, like I said, I was in China and I was reading two autobiographies at the same time. One was Malcolm X, and the other was Steve Jobs. And so I'm reading these two like at around the same time, and like not long after I quit because I was really inspired by how Malcolm X had recreated himself, you know, three times, at least three times, and had gone all in each of those moments. And he, you know, had different identities, different names. And I was kind of like, you know what? What if I was able to recreate myself and do something completely different, that out of left field, that no one saw coming, even myself, right? Like I would like that version of me. I would respect like that man. You know, so from one day to the next, I was supposed to stay there until the 2020 Olympics, right? Like I was working with one of the best teams, like weightlifting teams in the world, and so the decision to leave wasn't like I didn't take it lightly, and neither did they. They were not happy that I was leaving. Um, but I kind of felt like it's what I had to do in that moment for myself. Yeah.
Yeah, you only live once, man. If you see it coming, I love how it's like this is gonna be like a historical watermark. You know, like when we're doing your biography in like 40 years, it's like okay, like this is how Phil thought about that change.
Yeah.
There's so many different areas I want to dive into, but I want to dive into Rep Matter. So what you said during the
Mhm.
pandemic, you wanted to reinvent yourself, and obviously, I think it's a this initiative, you know, coming out of Rio, but really led by you about Rep Matters. Maybe just explain for the folks that don't know what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll talk about how it was. Well, so first of all, Rep Matters. It started as an interview series that highlighted Black entrepreneurs and investors in the Canadian tech space, and I'll give you the backstory to how it was created. So, um, I'm very much interested in leadership coaching, executive coaching, and so Monica, a leadership coach that I knew, we ended up having one conversation where I mentioned venture capital, and she was like, "Okay, I want you to meet someone." Next thing you know, I'm meeting John Stokes, who's one of the founding partners at Real Ventures, and that was the first VC I'd ever met. And so within that initial conversation with him, the topic I brought the topic up like I don't see any black people because when I came back and I looked at all the venture funds, there was literally not a single black person, not at the associate level, not at the partner level, not at the ops level, like nothing, right? And so he was like, you know what, I've noticed that too, and I don't know what the problem is or why that is, but let's talk about it. And so there was a series of conversations that we had, over the summer where we were just talking about these things very openly, very candidly. He wanted to learn, he wanted to understand the perspective, understand what he could do, and how his perspective could shift. And then George Floyd happened, and it became like a not just a me and John conversation; it was like a me and Real Ventures conversation. And so through that sort of I guess create co-creative space, John and I came up with the idea for Rep Matters, and he was willing to kind of put Real Ventures behind it. And so um, yeah, the kind of idea was born from conversations with John, and I was like, you know what, I think I could do like host the interviews, and I think I could produce this, and so he was kind of like, okay, like never done this before, but like, yeah, if you say you can do it, then why not? And yeah, I guess I can do it.
I think you did more than do it. Yeah, I'll link to the shows, and I think now that if I'm not mistaken, the series is technically or season one is over. Like you finished for now. I'll
Yeah,
link to the shows, which I think I listened to some of the interviews. Are really fantastic, a really
thank
great
you.
deep dive, and yeah, I'd like to hear if there's a synthesis or any takeaways that you learned from speaking to all these people, right? Where obviously your goal is really to help promote Black entrepreneurship, get more people of diverse backgrounds, cultures, and thought into tech.
Hmm.
And maybe as an aside, I find it's like more people coming into tech. It's a pretty good time, right? Whereas we're 2021, this thing is only getting started. So we think about wealth inequality. A good way to fight it is getting people working in the tech space, which is just like
Yeah.
flourishing and will continue to flourish for the next few decades. So we got a lot of steam and a lot of runway. So yeah, sorry, I went on a tangent there. What biggest takeaways from the series? Like, what did you learn that you didn't know before?
Yeah, well, I think that what comes to mind right off the top is how diverse Black people are. Right? There's not a Black community. There are Black communities, right? And our lived experiences are the same in some regards and very different in others. And so the diversity of thought that my interviewees had, right, was really interesting to me. And the differences in how we view certain things was very interesting to me. Um, and that almost complicates it a little bit more because one, we want to put things in boxes and make it really simple and say, Black people need this, and it's like, no, that's not really how it goes. It's actually much more complex than that. And there are some things that unify us, and there are others that really need special attention because it's like, okay, not everyone's going to fit in this bucket, and we need to pay more attention to this. But I love what you said about it being a good time for people to join. Like, really, when I came back and I did my research on the space, there's just an inequality in is it inequality the right word? Yeah, I think so. But there's a disproportion in tech workers, right? And who's going to become founders of tech companies is people who are already working in tech for the most part, right? People who are already in the industry. And so it's really important to get people through that first gate of like, okay, do you understand what the opportunities are in tech? And then on the other side, hey, are we opening doors for people to join us in this space, in this venture capital space, in this tech space? And so that's what, like, where Rep Matters kind of was crucial for me was in one, bringing the perspective of these people who have worked. Some of them have been working in the space for decades, right? And bringing their perspectives to light, and enabling that conversation to spur on other conversations, right? To where people were asking me questions. Okay, well, this, okay, this is an issue. Don't, never really thought about this before. Not enough black people in the room to have this perspective. So like, what's going on here, and how can we make this better? So yeah.
Interesting. I know it's maybe early, but have you seen any impact? Like, people reaching out to you, get people getting interested and saying, "Hey, I didn't really know about the technology space writ large, and it's interesting, and I see there's maybe opportunities for me." Because I imagine that's one way to get more people involved is to create that want, right, that desire for them to get in, right?
Yeah.
Because that's like I think that's the biggest one of the biggest issues, really creating engendering that desire for people to want to participate. So
Yeah. So
curious.
that's definitely there. And it's kind of two pronged, to where you have to create the even just the knowledge of the opportunity, but the opportunity has to be there, right? And so with season one, I was more focused on making people in the ecosystem aware of the issue, and so that there could be more thought and intentionality around how people approached, diversity and inclusion, specifically racial diversity and inclusion, right? Because we've been talking a lot about gender, which is amazing. Still a lot more work to do on that front, but there has been no talk in Canada or in Quebec, or up until last year, about racial diversity and inclusion in tech and in VC. So, um, yeah, I think that. Oof, lost my train of thought. What was the
That's
question
right.
again?
That's right. I was asking if you had the impact so far, right? So it's like I'd kind of pushed into like
Hmm.
creating that need, that desire, but then like what you've seen so far in terms of an impact, like people reaching out, any applications. I know it's early, but yeah, like you started answering it well with like the two prong.
Yeah,
So
there we go. So, do you want me to redo it, or do you want me to, or really quick?
wherever you want, I'll let it out. Maybe after, yeah, maybe I'll just add it, and then I'll be an add-on.
Okay, and so the other part of this sort of like two pronged approach is definitely, um, once we've built some capacity in the ecosystem, or some understanding, and some knowledge around how to create an inclusive space, then you invite people to join the space. But it's kind of, I didn't really want to invite people to join the space before there's a space, if that makes sense. And so right now, my focus is going to be on creating that awareness around the opportunities in tech and in VC. And so my Rep Matters is becoming more than just an interview series, right? Right now, my focus is actually on kind of building community. So, 2 weeks ago, I had a first Rep Matters event where it was very small, about a dozen people, but black entrepreneurs and investors, and community builders, and we kind of sat down and had breakfast together. And so that's going to be something, a recurring event that I'm going to be putting on. And I'm also looking at other events, but I really want to build community around this, like physical community. We can finally be together again. The COVID is kind of, we're allowed to get together in small groups. And so to me, it's really important to build that. I think that online, it was great to a certain extent. You can get a lot of people in the same Zoom room, but like, is it really the same feeling as physically, being together and having conversations and having those serendipitous moments where you meet someone you didn't know, and then all of a sudden, next thing, who knows, maybe you're getting funding, maybe you're giving funding, maybe you're working together on something. So I'd like to create that space for spontaneity, and for um, things to happen, but coming from a place of intention, where it's a black centric. It's focused on providing opportunities to black entrepreneurs, or maybe to people who want to join the tech workforce, etc.
Yeah, maybe a side question, and I don't know if I'll cut this out after, but like my thoughts right now go out to Montreal North, right, where particularly Saint Michel, it's like
Hmm.
the news coming out of that neighborhood, is not getting better. And like obviously, I've had have quite a few Haitian friends that give me a bit more of the inside, and it's not a lot of it's due to poor economic conditions. So
Hmm.
it's like going back to like for me, I see tech as this huge wealth creator, but it seems like there's this whole sector of the city that doesn't benefit from. I'm curious to hear your thoughts, just on a personal level, about that neighborhood, and if there's anything that we can do to help, or just curious to hear you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have that much perspective on like Saint Michel specifically, to be honest. My Haitian family's in Montreal North, and RDP, and so I do have some perspective there. But what I'll say as a generality is that if people aren't included, they will be excluded. Like there's if people aren't intentionally included, they will be excluded. And so right now we're seeing, the innovation economy taking over a huge, portion of the GDP, right? Where, a lot of Canada's growth is coming from the innovation economy. And if entire communities, geographic communities, aren't included in this, it's going to be a problem, right? And it's a problem that we'll only see like 10 years down the road. There's already problems now, and those comes from decisions that were made, 20 years ago. But I'm saying that that gap will only grow if entire geographies are left out of like this sort of innovation space. So that's my perspective on that.
Yeah, I'm gonna take that quote, right. If people aren't included, they're excluded. So I'm definitely stealing that. Uh, in terms of getting people more included, like what advice would you have for leaders? I think both, let's say on the business side or maybe the investment side, like how do you become more intentional? Like what does that really look like in the day to day? Like outside of that, I think most people, if not everyone, probably has a good intention and want to do work here, but then don't have a toolkit or like a field guide to like, okay, what do I do Monday, right? Like, so
Mhm.
any advice you'd have to give to leaders?
I think like caring enough to take action, even though you don't know, right? Like in the tech space, like how many times do we start something but we don't know where we're going? A lot, right? Like we take those leaps of faith, we iterate, we like and so it's the same thing. It's caring enough to take a leap of faith in that direction, right? Okay, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I mean well. I want to do this, so let me let me go do my market research. Let me go reach out to Black people, who are already in this space. Let me go talk to Phil. Let me go talk to there's other people who are doing this work in different spaces. Let me go talk to them and see kind of what their perspective is and what they're seeing, and learn from that. And so, to me, the first thing is about learning, right? It's someone like if you want to see a change within your organization, within your community, it has to come from you. And so, sure, I could hand you a guide, but it might not fit. And you know, it's almost like if I hand you something, are you really going to take it, or are you not going to value it because you didn't do the work to go find it? So there's a dual aspect of this to where it's like you want to go get informed, but then it's also like, hey, there's a lot of information out there, and there's a lot of things that can be done like from you, you know. So yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I see your point. Like, it has, I 100% agree that it has to start internally. There has to be an intrinsic motivation. My
Mhm.
question is more around was more around, okay, well, like people that want to do well, but they don't. Do they just start Googling? Like you said, take action. So I throwing an idea out to you, for you, Phil, is like become that hub, at least for Montreal, where it's like, have that central place where Rep Matters is that brand, and then because you'll have, let's say, like the CRM database of all the people that want to get into the community, you can almost be like the interface to allow people to get in, right? So one idea, like maybe it's a poor one, but sometimes it's like if people have good intentions, but they're also sometimes lazy if you don't exactly tell them what to do. So if
Mhm.
they just know that, hey, go to Rep Matters and like this is exactly the conduit to do good, maybe an idea to explore. So
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's my intention though, is to be that bridge, right? That two-way bridge where the tech sort of the very homogeneous tech ecosystem, right, can know where to interface with Black founders and maybe aspiring Black tech workers and whatever the case is, and vice versa, where Black people can feel comfortable because a lot of it is about trust and comfort, right? And that's something I've learned through my conversations with Black entrepreneurs, etc. you know they have to trust that there's a willingness in that space, and that it's a safe space for them to come, and that they're going to be treated well. And so I want to create that community that enables that for sure.
yeah, very cool, very cool. Maybe talk a little bit on the investment side, right? Like, in your role at Real Ventures, like any advice on the VC side, like how do VCs, help? Like, obviously, people that want to work in VC firms, but also within their portfolios. Curious if you've had those internal conversations at Real, and maybe other advice to like VCs or LPs that might be listening.
Yeah, hire Black VCs. you know so there's good research that's been done on this, right? We are attracted to people who look like us and who feel familiar to us, who have the same, gone to the same schools and whatever the case is. And that's subconscious, right? There's only a certain amount that we can correct for that, right? The rest of that correction has to happen through being more inclusive in terms of your team, right? If you have more representation on your team, then you are more likely to hear perspectives and have that in the actual decision making process for the investment decision, and have that reflected, and so that where you're actually writing checks to more diverse founders, whether it's black or other. And so yes, I think that it's super important to have more black people at the table, right? Like if you look at Canadian VC firms, it's kind of scary. Like I know almost all the black investors in Canada, and I shouldn't be able to say that, right? Like, I wish I didn't, right? But I kind of do. So I think that that's one of the primary things, is that it's almost impossible to know what you don't know, right? And if you don't have that perspective at your table, at the seat at your table, internally, it's very hard to make a change in the direction of diversity.
Yeah, I agree, 100% agree. And it goes back to your other point of like the other prong of also getting people interested, right? Whereas I think we'll hopefully start to see more people of diverse backgrounds once they're interested and want to get into the space, that they feel that they can be included, right? So which is probably not the case right now.
Hmm.
So interesting insights for why it makes sense from a capital allocation perspective. Some of the research I've seen is that funding entrepreneurs with diverse backgrounds is actually good for your returns, right? So curious to hear you on this. I'm not an expert. This is what I've seen at a high level. Curious to hear
Yeah.
like why just economic sense. You should be funding black entrepreneurs, for instance. So curious to hear you.
Well, yeah, there's different sort of takes on that, right? There's the this is the right thing to do, and then there's the this is the right thing to do economically, right? And there's different research that's shown, okay, yes, the more diverse a company is, the more innovative they are, and therefore the more money they make, or whatever the case is. Um, but really, if you think about it from a social, from a bigger picture, from like a social construction level, where it's like, okay, you have X% of your population that is non-white, right? So from all these various communities across the world, if the people building products are only white, they will only serve white people and then the marginal amount of other people, right? And so, in order to build things that everyone can actually use, and which makes it better for you, right? Because more people can buy and use your product, you have to have that representation internally in your company, right? And so yeah, it's just necessary to building products that serve the many, and that's in your best interest as a company. And then obviously, from a VC perspective, it's the same thing, right? If your portfolio only reflects a certain, that means that you've now invested in a set of products that only serve a certain group of people, and that have not been intentional about being inclusive about another set of people. And so you're actually increasing your risk, I find, like from my perspective, right? It would be decreased risk to have a whole diverse you know portfolio. So
Yeah, I think it's a very good point, right? Where it's like, it becomes a societal question, right? Where it's like, do you really want like five white Caucasian engineers like in San Francisco that like that have an app for billions of people, right? Is that going to be enough, like diversity in terms of like the product that they're building? So I think you raise a good point that goes beyond just like fairness. It's just like, as a society, like it's like probably doesn't make sense.
yeah.
So we should be taking more action on this. So what's next for Rep Matters, man? So you spoke about some of the big ideas. Like, what can people like if they want to follow, pay attention to Rep Matters? What's the best way, and like kind of what's the next step for your project and your community, which I like as a word, obviously.
Yeah. So I mean, for Rep Matters, you can find us on LinkedIn. We also have the interviews hosted on the Real Ventures website. So realventures.com/Rep Matters. Yeah, and then just follow us there. We're going to be doing, community based events. That's what's next for Red Matters, right? And then obviously I'll be doing more interviews. But to me, the community building aspect was more important right now, especially coming out of COVID. And so that's where the focus is going to be. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, you can email me at philgj@realventures.com. And you can also find me on LinkedIn, Phil G. Joseph. Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. Well, Phil, dude, it's been a pleasure. We'll need to do some Muay Thai together at some point.
I have to get back into it. I'm so out of shape.
That's it. It'll be a good workout. Dude, it's been a real pleasure. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me.